The idea fell on fertile ground in Russia 1917. The Tsars lived lavishly while peasants starved to death. No bread and the high cost of living led to massive strikes. Unable to cope, the Tsar abdicated and a shaky provisional government took over. With so much unrest, Nikolai Lenin took advantage of the opportunity and seized power, introducing his own modified version of communism, which in reality is totalitarianism, total control from the top. Russians have been conditioned to regard Lenin as a saint. They line up for blocks every day to see his tomb. While Lenin promised to create the freest country in the world, the individual continues to be less important than the state. With that as their governing style, Lenin and his successors have transformed their agricultural economy into a heavily industrial one. But consumer desires were sacrificed in the process. More guns, so less butter. Since the Soviet leadership has solidified its authority both within the country and without, it has cautiously but gradually opened its doors to trade, to pacify somewhat the growing internal demand for Western consumer goods and for international political reasons. The Russians predicted correctly that entrepreneurs would see dollar signs dancing in their heads at the prospect of selling to such an untouched market, and that they would prod their own governments to extend lines of credit which the cash-short Russians could then use to buy Western products. Governments of Western countries eager to boost their sagging economies for their own political reasons are consequently courting the Russians passionately. A Canadian trade mission, for example, arrived in Moscow last October.
Oh, good to see you. How we do this in Russia?
Some Canadian businessmen complain that the Russians are extremely hard to deal with, to the point where some say it's not worth the bother. Why? Primarily because everything here is part of government bureaucracy that is highly compartmentalized. After all, the Soviet Union is a socialist state, controlled from the top. Let's say you had the greatest steering wheel to sell them. First, you should contact the Canadian Embassy in Moscow. They'll check with the Ministry of Foreign Trade, and if it's interested, then the Foreign Trade Organization, which deals with Canada, must approve. Then the industry that will actually use your product, in this case a car factory, must indicate its interest. Only at this point will you be invited to come and show your steering wheel. But that's not all for the sale. Clearance must be granted from the Department of Finance and the State Planning Agency to make sure there's enough hard currency to make the purchase, and that it fits in with the Communist Party plan. In short, Canadian businessmen will find it's no short-term project.
Well, I think they won't have any realization of the time involved. I've been working on the Soviet Union requests for over 3 years, and I feel that maybe just now I'm getting to learn how it can be done. The problems are great. The people you deal with are on all levels. You must talk to the technical people first, and then they go into their purchasing agents, and the purchasing agents are buffers. They are the ones who protect the ministry and protect the people from you, so that you are prevented from getting to the people who make decisions.
Well, the Russians are hard to deal with. They are very good businessmen in their own way, and they're very tough bargainers, so it's not going to be easy to make a quick deal with the Russians. But my advice would be, if anyone has a good product, of good quality, and the price is right, and he thinks it's something which the Russians need, then there is a possibility of selling it here. And there have been quite a number of examples of small Canadian companies which have had a product of this sort and have gone after the Russian market, and they've got it. But it requires insistence, obstinacy, and good nerves.
To compete better with businessmen from other countries for the Russian market, Canadians seem eager to have a much greater commercial representation here. They've suggested a trading company, but there are few Canadian organizations that are really big enough or likely to do enough business with the USSR over a period of years to justify the big expense of that. The answer may be for a number of smaller firms to get together, to send a permanent representative to act on their mutual behalf. Bruce Page, CJOH News, Moscow.